I hadn't planned to be home so early. The meeting with our client wrapped up faster than expected, and we sealed the deal, a multi-million-dollar contract that would change everything for Camila and me. For the first time in years, I felt like the sacrifices, the late nights, the business trips, the missed holidays, were worth it. My mind was racing with ideas on how to celebrate. Maybe a trip to the Bahamas, or that diamond bracelet she had her eye on. She deserved it. Or so I thought. The last-minute flight home was exhausting but exciting. It was close to midnight when I pulled into our quiet suburban neighborhood. I remember feeling a strange mix of relief and anticipation. The house was dark except for a soft glow coming from our bedroom window. My heart ached for Camila, my wife of 7 years, my partner through thick and thin. I was home. As I approached the driveway, my headlights illuminated a sleek gold Mercedes parked in my spot. My stomach dropped. It wasn't ours. For a moment, I rationalized it. Maybe a friend's car? A surprise for me? But something about it felt off. I parked on the street and sat there, staring at the unfamiliar car. Every scenario I conjured up felt hollow, an excuse I wanted to believe. I grabbed my suitcase, walked up the driveway, and hesitated at the door. My key felt cold and heavy in my hand. Quietly, I stepped inside. The house smelled like her favorite lavender candles, and everything was just as I left it, a little too perfect. My unease grew with every step up the stairs. When I reached our bedroom door, it wasn't fully closed. I nudged it open, and the world as I knew it shattered. There they were. Camila, the woman I gave everything for, lying entwined with a man I didn't recognize. They were sound asleep, oblivious to my presence. I froze. My first instinct was to storm in, to scream, to wake them up and demand answers. But I didn't. Instead, I stood there, letting the betrayal sink in like a knife through my chest. It was the ultimate betrayal. And yet, I felt a calmness I couldn't explain. Anger boiled beneath the surface, but something stopped me from losing control. I pulled out my phone, capturing the scene in a few photos. Evidence. Proof. I needed clarity, something to hold on to when this nightmare felt unreal. Then, as quietly as I came, I left. The gold Mercedes in the driveway suddenly made sense, but the man behind the wheel was still a mystery. I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel, trembling. My mind raced with questions, but one thing was clear: I couldn't stay in that house. Not tonight. I didn't sleep. I parked a few streets away, sat in the car, and stared at nothing. The photos on my phone were evidence, sure, but they were also a reminder, a gut-wrenching replay of the moment everything fell apart. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw them together, peaceful and unaware, as if I didn't exist. By dawn, I knew I couldn't avoid the house forever. I needed clothes, my laptop, and some semblance of a plan. I parked down the block and walked back, the morning air cold against my skin. The gold Mercedes was still there. The sight made my blood boil. I clenched my fists so tightly my nails dug into my palms. Swallowing my anger, I walked inside. The house was silent, but I could feel the betrayal hanging in the air like a thick fog. I grabbed a duffel bag from the closet and threw in some clothes, careful not to make too much noise. I was almost done when I heard a soft creak from the bedroom. My heart pounded. Camila stood in the doorway, wearing one of my shirts like nothing had happened. She rubbed her eyes and smiled sleepily. "You're back early," she said, her voice light and carefree. For a moment, I just stared at her, unable to reconcile the woman in front of me with what I had seen hours earlier. She didn't know I knew. She didn't know her world was about to crumble. "Yeah," I said flatly, zipping up the bag. Her smile faltered. "Is everything okay? You seem off." I bit back the 1,000 things I wanted to scream at her. Instead, I stepped past her, duffel bag slung over my shoulder. "We'll talk later," I said, my voice cold. "Max, wait, what's going on?" she asked, following me down the hall. I turned to face her, and for the first time, I saw something in her eyes: worry. Not guilt, not remorse. Just worry that she might lose control of the narrative. I couldn't deal with her lies, not yet. Without another word, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. Back in the car, my hands trembled as I gripped the steering wheel. I didn't know where to go, but I knew I couldn't stay. My mind raced through the list of people I could call, but the truth was, I didn't want anyone to know. Not yet. I needed time. Time to process, to plan, to figure out my next move. For now, I drove aimlessly, the images from last night replaying over and over in my mind. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear: this wasn't going to end quietly. Ended up at a diner on the edge of town, one of those 24/7 places with cheap coffee and a lingering smell of burnt toast. It wasn't exactly the kind of place I'd ever choose to hang out, but it felt safe, anonymous. I slid into a booth by the window, ordered coffee, and stared at the duffel bag sitting on the seat across from me. The waitress poured me a cup, but I barely touched it. My phone buzzed on the table, vibrating against the cheap laminate. Camila's name flashed on the screen. My stomach tightened. I let it ring. Then came the texts. Camila, hey, what's going on? You left in such a rush. Camila, are you mad at me? Did I do something wrong? Wrong? Did she seriously not know? Or was this part of her game, playing innocent, trying to get me to doubt myself? I locked the phone and shoved it into my jacket pocket. I needed answers. The guy in the gold Mercedes wasn't just some random hookup. He had been comfortable enough to park in my driveway. Was he someone I knew? A coworker? A friend? The thought made my stomach churn. I scrolled through my photos from the night, staring at his face. There was something about him that felt familiar, but I couldn't place it. Hours later, I found myself parked outside my best friend Eric's house. Eric and I had been close since college, and if there was anyone I could trust with this mess, it was him. But even as I sat there, I hesitated. Telling someone made it real. It meant I couldn't pretend this wasn't happening. Finally, I knocked on the door. Eric opened it, bleary-eyed and wearing sweatpants, clearly not expecting company. Max? What are you doing here? You okay? He asked, stepping aside to let me in. I didn't answer right away. Instead, I dropped my duffel bag by the couch and collapsed into a chair. I need to tell you something, I said, my voice barely above a whisper. Eric frowned and sat across from me, his concern evident. What's going on? I took a deep breath and pulled out my phone. Last night, I came home early from my trip. She was with someone else. In our bed. Eric's jaw dropped. What? Are you serious? I nodded and showed him the photos. His reaction was immediate, a mix of anger and disgust. Who the hell is that guy? I don't know, I admitted, my voice trembling. But something about him feels familiar. Eric stared at the photos, then froze. Wait a second, he said, leaning closer. I think I've seen him before. At your anniversary party last year. Isn't that Daniel? Daniel? I asked, my mind racing. Yeah, Daniel, Eric said. Camila's coworker. You introduced him to me. They worked together at her office. I felt like I'd been punched in the gut. Of course. Daniel. The charming guy she mentioned once or twice, but always brushed off as just a friend. My hands clenched into fists. Max, Eric said carefully, what are you going to do? I don't know, I admitted. But I'm not letting her get away with this. For the first time since I saw them together, I felt a strange sense of clarity. Daniel wasn't just some faceless stranger anymore, he was a target. If Camila wanted to lie her way out of this, she was going to have to face the truth first. This wasn't over. Not by a long shot. Eric offered to let me crash at his place, but I declined. As tempting as it was to avoid going back to the house, I needed to face Camila. I wasn't ready to expose what I knew, but I wanted to see how far she'd go to cover her tracks. Besides, it was still my house. Why should I be the one hiding? When I pulled into the driveway, the gold Mercedes was gone. That fact alone made my blood boil. Daniel had just waltzed out of my life as easily as he'd walked into it. For now. Inside, Camila was waiting for me. She was sitting on the couch, her phone clutched in her hand like she'd been glued to it all day. When she saw me, she jumped up, her face a mix of relief and something else. Nervousness, maybe. Max. You had me worried sick. What happened? Why did you leave like that? She asked, rushing over. I set my bag down and shrugged off my jacket. Work stuff, I said simply. I needed some time to think. Her brow furrowed. Work stuff? Max, you've never just walked out like that. Talk to me. I sat down in the armchair and met her gaze. Talk to you? Like how we talk about Daniel. Her face paled, and for a moment, she froze. It was so quick that if I hadn't been watching her so closely, I might have missed it. She recovered fast, forcing a confused laugh. Daniel? What does he have to do with anything? I didn't answer right away. Instead, I leaned forward, elbows on my knees, and studied her. I'm just saying. He's come up in conversation before. I don't know much about him, but he's important to you, right? Her smile faltered. He's a coworker, Max. That's it. What's with the questions? I could see the cracks forming, but I didn't want to push too hard. Not yet. I shrugged and leaned back, acting as nonchalant as I could. No reason. Just curious. Forget I said anything. Camila hesitated, searching my face for clues. Max, if something's bothering you, you can tell me. Can I? I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. She flinched. Of course you can. We're a team, remember? The word team hit me like a slap. I fought the urge to laugh bitterly. Team? The only team she seemed to be playing for was hers and Daniel's. But I wasn't going to let her see how much I knew. Not yet. I'll hold you to that, I said evenly, standing up. I'm going to take a shower. As I walked past her, I could feel her eyes on me, full of questions she didn't dare ask. Good. Let her stew in her own guilt for a while. In the shower, I let the hot water pour over me, trying to calm the storm inside. I kept replaying the moment she flinched when I mentioned Daniel's name. It wasn't much, but it was enough to confirm my suspicions. She was lying. When I stepped out of the bathroom, Camila was still sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone. She looked up at me, her expression carefully neutral. Max, are we okay? I wanted to scream that we weren't, that we'd never be okay again. But instead, I forced a small smile. We're fine. Just tired. Long day. She nodded, but the tension in the room was palpable. As I headed to bed, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of her lies unraveling. I didn't know where this road was going to take me, but one thing was clear. I wasn't going to stop until I had the whole truth. The next morning, I woke up early, but Camila was already up. I found her in the kitchen, pouring coffee like it was any other day. The sight made my stomach turn. She glanced at me and smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. Morning, she said softly. I made your coffee. Figured you might need it. Thanks, I muttered, grabbing the mug. The tension between us was almost suffocating. She watched me for a moment, then cleared her throat. About last night, you seemed upset. I don't like it when we're not on the same page. I took a sip of coffee, the bitterness matching the knot in my chest. I told you it was just work stuff. She frowned but didn't push. Instead, she started rinsing dishes, her movements deliberate and focused, like she was trying to keep herself busy. I set the mug down and leaned against the counter, watching her. How's Daniel doing these days? The question hung in the air. She froze for half a second before turning to face me, her expression carefully controlled. What is with you and Daniel all of a sudden? Did something happen? Why? Should something have happened? I shot back. Her eyes narrowed. No. I just don't understand why you're asking about him out of the blue. I crossed my arms, leaning back. I've just been thinking about our relationship. You know, who we spend time with, who we talk to. Trying to figure out if there are gaps. Her face flushed, but she laughed nervously. Gaps? Max, you're being ridiculous. Daniel is a coworker. That's it. Right, I said, letting the word hang. And when's the last time you talked to him? She hesitated. I don't know. A few days ago, maybe? At the office. Why? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. No reason. Just curious. It's not like he was in our driveway or anything. Her eyes widened for a split second before she masked it with confusion. What are you talking about? I held her gaze, my heart pounding. Forget it. I'm probably just imagining things. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Camila kept herself busy, cleaning the house and running errands, but I could feel her watching me when she thought I wasn't looking. She knew something was wrong. Good. That evening, I decided to call Eric. He picked up after a couple of rings. Max, what's up? He said, his tone concerned. I need a favor, I said, pacing the living room. Name it. I need you to help me dig into Daniel. I want to know everything about him, where he lives, his schedule, anything that might explain what the hell he's doing in my life. Eric didn't hesitate. I'll see what I can find. Give me a day or two. Thanks, I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Max, Eric added, his voice softer, are you sure you're okay? I paused, staring at the floor. Not really. But I'll be fine. I have to be. That night, Camila climbed into bed beside me, but she didn't say a word. I could feel the tension radiating off her, but I didn't care. Let her squirm. Let her wonder how much I knew. I stared at the ceiling, the weight of everything pressing down on me. The betrayal, the lies, the uncertainty, they all felt like a noose tightening around my neck. But for the first time, I had a sense of purpose. Camila thought she could control the narrative, but she was wrong. I was going to find the truth, and when I did, I'd make sure she couldn't escape it. The next morning, Camila was quieter than usual. She sat across from me at the breakfast table, scrolling through her phone, her brow furrowed. I could tell she wanted to ask something but was holding back. I didn't give her the satisfaction of breaking the silence. My phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a message from Eric. Eric, got some info. Call me when you can. The timing couldn't have been better. I've got some errands to run, I said, standing up and grabbing my keys. Camila looked up, startled. You're leaving already? It's Saturday. Yeah, just need to take care of a few things, I said casually, avoiding her gaze. She hesitated, then nodded. Okay. Be safe. As I walked out, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was watching me go. I parked at a strip mall a few blocks away and called Eric. Max, I think you're onto something, he said, skipping the pleasantries. Daniel's got a bit of a reputation. What do you mean? I asked, gripping the steering wheel. Office gossip. Apparently, he's been involved with at least 2 women at work, both married. One of them ended up leaving her husband for him. The other? It didn't end so well. The husband found out and filed for divorce. It was messy. My stomach churned. And now he's involved with Camila, I muttered. Seems like it, Eric said. I also found out where he lives. It's a condo downtown. Not far from your office, actually. I leaned back in my seat, the pieces starting to come together. Daniel wasn't just some fling, this was his pattern. He targeted married women, manipulated them, and left destruction in his wake. I need to see him, I said. Max, are you sure that's a good idea? Eric asked, his voice cautious. No, I admitted. But I don't care. That afternoon, I drove to Daniel's condo. My heart was pounding as I parked across the street, my hands gripping the wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. What was I even planning to do? Burst in and confront him? I didn't have a plan, but I needed to see him. To put a face to the man who had invaded my life and destroyed my trust. As I sat there, watching the building, a familiar figure emerged from the front entrance. It was Daniel. He was dressed casually, carrying a gym bag over his shoulder. For a moment, I just stared, taking him in. He looked so normal, unremarkable, even. But there was an arrogance in his stride that made my blood boil. I fought the urge to get out of the car and confront him right there. Instead, I snapped a quick photo of him with my phone. Evidence. When I got home, Camila was waiting in the living room, her arms crossed. Where were you? She asked, her tone sharp. Out, I said simply, brushing past her. Out where, Max? I turned to face her, my expression cold. Why do you care? Her eyes narrowed. Because you've been acting strange, and I don't like it. If something's wrong, just tell me. I let out a bitter laugh. You want me to tell you what's wrong? Fine. Let's talk about Daniel. Her face drained of color, and for the first time, she didn't have a quick response. Max, Save it, I said, cutting her off. I'm not interested in your excuses. Not anymore. I turned and walked to the bedroom, slamming the door behind me. This wasn't over. Not even close. I spent the night tossing and turning, Camila's stunned face playing on a loop in my mind. Her reaction when I mentioned Daniel was exactly what I expected. Shock, guilt, and fear. She knew she was caught, even if I hadn't laid all my cards on the table yet. The next morning, she tried to act like nothing had happened. She made breakfast and smiled at me across the table, like we were still the happy couple we used to be. It was almost impressive how easily she slipped into her routine. But I wasn't buying it. I watched her carefully as I sipped my coffee. So, what are your plans today? I asked, keeping my tone casual. She hesitated, her fork hovering over her plate. Just the usual. Maybe some errands. Why? Just curious, I said with a shrug. She forced a smile, but I could see the tension in her shoulders. What about you? I've got some work to catch up on, I lied. Might head out for a bit. Her smile faltered. You've been leaving a lot lately. Yeah, well, someone's got to keep things running, I said, my voice sharper than I intended. She didn't respond, but the look in her eyes told me everything I needed to know. She was starting to panic. After breakfast, I waited until Camila left the house before making my move. I had seen her grab her purse and car keys, but she hadn't said where she was going. That was fine. I planned to find out. I followed her. Her car wound through the city streets, eventually pulling into a parking lot near a coffee shop downtown. I parked a few spaces away and watched as she got out and walked inside. For a moment, I thought maybe I was overreacting. Maybe she really was just grabbing a coffee. But then I saw him. Daniel. He walked into the coffee shop a few minutes later, his confident stride as infuriating as ever. My hands gripped the steering wheel, every muscle in my body tense as I watched them through the window. They sat at a table in the corner, talking animatedly. Camila laughed at something he said, leaning in closer. It was like a dagger to the heart. I snapped a few photos with my phone, my hands trembling. This wasn't just suspicion anymore, this was proof. Back at the house, I waited for her to come home. The hours crawled by, my anger simmering just below the surface. When she finally walked through the door, she looked surprised to see me. Hey, she said hesitantly. I thought you were working. I finished early, I said, crossing my arms. She set her purse down on the counter and glanced at me nervously. How was your day? Fine, I said curtly. Yours? She hesitated, then forced a smile. Good. Just ran some errands. Errands, huh? I said, my voice cold. Like meeting Daniel at a coffee shop? Her face went pale, and she froze, her eyes wide. What are you talking about? I followed you, Camila, I said, my voice trembling with anger. I saw you with him. Don't lie to me. For a moment, she just stared at me, her mouth opening and closing like she couldn't find the words. Then finally, she sighed and sank into a chair. Okay, she said softly. Yes, I saw him. But it's not what you think. I laughed bitterly. Not what I think. You were laughing with him, leaning into him like I don't exist. What exactly am I supposed to think? She looked down at her hands, her voice barely above a whisper. I was just trying to end things. End things. I repeated, my voice rising. So you admit there's something to end? Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't care. I had waited too long for the truth, and now that it was finally coming out, I wasn't going to let her manipulate me with her emotions. Yes, she said, her voice breaking. We made a mistake. I made a mistake. But it's over, Max. I swear. I shook my head, the weight of her words crashing down on me. It's over? You think that makes it okay? You betrayed me, Camila. You betrayed us. I know, she sobbed. And I hate myself for it. But please, Max, you have to believe me, it didn't mean anything. Her words were like gasoline on a fire. Didn't mean anything? You don't destroy a marriage for something that doesn't mean anything, Camila. She reached for me, but I stepped back, shaking my head. Don't, I said, my voice trembling. I can't even look at you right now. And with that, I walked out, slamming the door behind me. I stayed in the car for a while, gripping the steering wheel, trying to calm down. Her words echoed in my head, it didn't mean anything. It was such a pathetic excuse, insulting even. When I finally went back inside, she was still sitting at the table, her face streaked with tears. She looked up at me, hopeful. Max, please, she started, but I cut her off. Don't. I'm not here to argue with you. I'm here to figure out what happens next. Her lip quivered. It was a mistake. I was lonely. You've been so busy with work and Daniel, he just... I slammed my hand on the table, and she flinched. Don't you dare blame this on me. You had a choice, Camila. And you chose him. She stayed silent, staring at the table. Do you even want this marriage anymore? I asked, my voice cold. Yes, she whispered. I do. I love you, Mac. Her words sounded hollow, but I didn't press further. I turned and headed to the guest room. I'm staying here tonight, I said over my shoulder. The silence that followed was louder than any argument. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of Camila moving around in the kitchen. I didn't join her. I stayed in the guest room, scrolling through my phone, staring at the photos I'd taken. Every time I looked at Daniel's face, my anger grew. Eventually, she knocked on the door. "Max? Can we talk?" I opened the door but didn't let her in. "What now?" Her eyes were red, and she was holding a cup of coffee like it was a peace offering. I want to know what I can do to fix this." I laughed bitterly. "Fix this? You can't undo what you did, Camila. You can't erase the lies, the betrayal." She stepped closer, her voice breaking. "I'll do anything, Max, counseling, therapy, whatever you want. Just, don't give up on us." I stared at her, torn between the love I used to feel and the rage bubbling inside me. "We'll see," I said finally, closing the door in her face. I spent the day avoiding her, leaving the house to clear my head. Every moment away from her felt like a breath of fresh air, but the moment I stepped back inside, the tension returned. When I got home, Camila was on the couch, her phone in her lap. She stood as soon as she saw me. "I reached out to a marriage counselor," she said quietly. "I set up an appointment for us." I didn't respond right away. Finally, I said, "Fine. But don't think this is me forgiving you. This is just the first step." Her face crumpled with relief. "Thank you, Max. I promise, I'll do whatever it takes." I didn't believe her, not fully. But for now, I'd let her think she had a chance to fix what she'd broken. The marriage counselor's office was small and unassuming, a neutral space filled with muted colors and generic artwork. Camila sat next to me on the couch, her hands folded tightly in her lap. I kept my distance, leaning back with my arms crossed. The counselor, a middle-aged woman named Dr. Myers, gave us a warm but professional smile. "Thank you both for coming. I know this can be difficult, but it's an important step." Camila nodded quickly. "I just want to make things right. I know I've hurt Max deeply, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to rebuild the trust." Dr. Myers turned to me. "Max, how are you feeling about being here today?" "Honestly, I'm here because I want answers," I said flatly. "I'm not sure there's anything to rebuild." Camila's eyes glistened with tears, but I didn't look at her. Dr. Myers nodded. "That's a valid feeling. Betrayal can be incredibly painful. Camila, why don't we start with you? Can you share why this happened?" Camila took a shaky breath. I don't know. I was lonely. Max has been so focused on work, and Daniel, he gave me attention. He made me feel wanted. But it was a mistake, and I regret it." Her words felt rehearsed, hollow. I shook my head. "So this is my fault? Because I was working to build a future for us?" "No," she said quickly. "I'm not blaming you, Max. This is on me. I made a terrible decision, and I hate myself for it." Dr. Myers raised a hand. "Let's focus on what happened and how to move forward. Camila, what are you willing to do to rebuild trust?" "Anything," she said, her voice trembling. "I'll cut all contact with Daniel. I'll be transparent. I'll go to counseling, alone, if that's what Max wants." I stared at her, searching for sincerity. "It's not just about cutting contact," I said. "It's about proving that you're not going to betray me again. I need actions, not words." Dr. Myers nodded. "That's fair. Rebuilding trust takes time and consistent effort. Camila, are you prepared to show that kind of commitment?" "Yes," she said firmly, glancing at me. "I'll do whatever it takes." The session ended with a plan, weekly counseling and a list of boundaries. Camila promised to be transparent about her phone, her schedule, everything. But as we walked out of the office, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was all too little, too late. She grabbed my arm as we reached the car. "Max, I mean it. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this." I pulled my arm away gently. "We'll see," I said, my voice cold. And I meant it. The days after the counseling session felt like walking on thin ice. Camila was trying, too hard, if I'm honest. She cooked elaborate meals, left me handwritten notes apologizing, and hovered like she was afraid I'd vanish if she left me alone. It was suffocating. "Do you need anything?" she asked for the 5th time that evening as I sat on the couch. I didn't look up. "No. I'm fine." She lingered in the doorway, fidgeting. "Max, do you think we're making progress? Are we okay?" I set down the remote and finally met her gaze. I don't know, Camila. Trust isn't something you rebuild overnight. Her shoulders slumped, and she nodded. I understand. I just want to show you that I'm serious. Then give me space, I said, my tone sharper than I intended. She bit her lip, tears welling in her eyes, but she turned and left the room without another word. That night, as I lay in bed, her words from the session kept replaying in my head. He made me feel wanted. It was like a knife twisting in my gut. I had spent years working to provide for us, sacrificing my time and energy, all to build a life she wouldn't have to worry about. And yet, she'd still found that comfort in someone else. The worst part? I wasn't sure if I could ever let that go. The next day, Eric called. How's it going? He asked cautiously. I sighed, pacing the living room. She's trying. But I don't know if it's enough. Or if it even matters. You have every right to feel that way, he said. But what's your plan? Are you staying? Leaving? Still figuring it out. Still figuring it out, I admitted. She says she's cutting ties with Daniel, but I don't trust her. Eric paused. Do you want me to check on that? I hesitated. It felt underhanded, but trust was out the window anyway. Yeah. See what you can find out. Will do, Eric said. Hang in there, Mac. Later that afternoon, Camila left for errands. When she was gone, I checked her phone. It was a small, pathetic act, but I needed to know if she was being honest. Nothing. No texts, no calls, no evidence of Daniel. For a moment, I felt relieved. Then I realized how ridiculous it was that I needed to snoop to feel reassured. This was my life now, a constant loop of doubt and suspicion. A week passed, and I wish I could say things got easier, but they didn't. Camila kept her distance, giving me the space I'd asked for, but it only made the house feel emptier. She was trying to fix things, cooking meals she knew I liked, leaving little notes in places she knew I'd find them, even scheduling another counseling session without me asking. But her efforts felt like pouring water on a forest fire. I went through the motions at work, barely able to focus. Eric checked in daily, his voice a rare anchor in the chaos. Any news on Daniel? I asked one night as I sat in my car outside the house. Actually, yeah, Eric said. A guy I know at the coffee shop said he saw him there again yesterday. Alone. He looked pretty tense, kept checking his phone. And you're sure Camila wasn't with him? Positive, Eric said. I even asked around discreetly. Nobody's seen her with him since that day you followed her. The news should have been reassuring, but it wasn't. The idea that Daniel might still be waiting in the wings gnawed at me. That evening, after dinner, Camila sat down across from me. Max, we need to talk, she said softly. I put down my phone and looked at her. What about? She hesitated, her hands twisting in her lap. I want to know where we stand. Are you even willing to try to make this work? Her question hit me like a brick. I wanted to say yes, to give her some shred of hope, but the truth was, I didn't know. I don't have an answer for you, I said finally. Her face fell, and tears welled in her eyes. I know I hurt you, Max. I know I broke your trust. But I'm trying, can't you see that? Doesn't that count for anything? I leaned back in my chair, staring at the ceiling. You're trying, Camila, but that doesn't undo what you did. It doesn't erase the lies, the nights I stayed up wondering if I was just imagining things. You didn't just betray me, you made me question everything about our life together. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands. I wanted to comfort her, to tell her it would be okay, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Later that night, as I sat in the guest room, my phone buzzed. It was a message from Eric. Eric, just heard something interesting. Call me when you can. I stepped outside, the cool night air stinging my skin as I dialed. What's up? I asked. So, I talked to another guy who works in Daniel's building, Eric said. Turns out, Daniel's been acting paranoid lately. Asking about security cameras, trying to figure out if anyone's been watching him. Why would he care about security cameras? I don't know, Eric admitted. But get this, he asked about the garage cameras specifically. Like he's worried about someone seeing his car. My stomach churned. He knows, I said. Knows what? That I followed him. He must have seen me. Eric was silent for a moment. What do you want to do, Max? I clenched my jaw, my mind racing. I need to talk to him. Face to face. That's risky, Eric said. What if it backfires? I don't care, I said. I need answers. The next day, I drove to Daniel's condo. I waited in the car until I saw him leave, then followed him to a gym a few blocks away. I parked and watched as he went inside, then waited a few minutes before heading in myself. He was on a treadmill near the back, earbuds in, oblivious to the world. I walked up and stood next to him until he finally noticed me. His eyes widened in shock. Max, he said, pulling out his earbuds. What are you doing here? I crossed my arms. We need to talk. About what? He asked, though the nervous flicker in his eyes told me he already knew. Camila, I said bluntly. He froze, then stepped off the treadmill, grabbing a towel. Look man, I don't think this is the place. Cut the crap, I snapped. I know about you too. I've known for weeks. So don't waste my time with denials. He hesitated, then sighed. Fine. Let's talk outside. We stepped into the parking lot, the air thick with tension. How long? I asked, my voice low but firm. Max, I didn't mean for it to happen. I said how long? I barked. He flinched. A few months, he admitted. But it's over. I ended it. I laughed bitterly. You ended it? That's funny, because Camila told me she ended it. He looked away, guilt written all over his face. I don't know what she told you, but it's done. I swear. You think that makes it better? I asked, stepping closer. You think it's over erases the fact that you slept with my wife? Look, I'm sorry, he said, raising his hands defensively. I messed up, okay? But you need to talk to her, not me. I clenched my fists, resisting the urge to hit him. You're lucky I don't break your face right here, I said through gritted teeth. He nodded, backing away. I get it. I deserve that. But if you want the whole story, you'll have to ask her. I turned and walked back to my car, my head spinning. Camila wanted to fix things, but she hadn't told me the full truth. And until she did, there was no way forward. I drove home in a fog, Daniel's words playing on repeat. If you want the whole story, you'll have to ask her. It was infuriating. Camila had claimed she was being honest, but if Daniel had more to share, it meant she was still hiding things. When I walked through the door, Camila was in the kitchen, chopping vegetables. She looked up, her face brightening slightly. Hey, she said cautiously. You're home early. I didn't respond. Instead, I set my keys on the counter and leaned against it, staring at her. Max, she asked, her voice uneasy. We need to talk, I said. Her knife faltered, and she set it down carefully. Okay. About what? About Daniel, I said bluntly. She froze, her shoulders tensing. I told you it's over. Stop, I interrupted, my voice sharp. I just talked to him. I know you're still not telling me everything. Her eyes widened, and she took a step back. You talked to him? Yes, I said. And he said if I wanted the whole story, I'd have to get it from you. So here's your chance, Camila. Tell me everything. Her face crumpled, and she sank into a chair, covering her face with her hands. I thought I already did, she whispered. Clearly not, I said coldly. How long were you seeing him? How many lies did you tell me? How many times did you sneak off to be with him? She looked up, tears streaming down her face. It started a few months ago. He was just a friend at first, but then, it got out of hand. We met up a few times, at hotels, mostly. I don't know why I let it happen, Max. I wasn't thinking. I gritted my teeth, the bile rising in my throat. Hotels. So it wasn't just emotional, was it? She shook her head, her voice breaking. No. It wasn't. The confirmation hit me like a punch to the gut. I turned away, pacing the room. Why, Camila? Why him? What did I do to deserve this? You didn't do anything, she said, her voice desperate. This is on me, Max. I was selfish and stupid, and I let myself get caught up in something that never should have happened. I stopped and faced her, my chest heaving with anger. And what about now? Are you still talking to him? No, she said quickly. I swear, it's over. I blocked his number. I haven't seen him since the coffee shop. The days that followed felt like a tightrope walk. Camila kept her phone unlocked and within reach, making a point to show me she had nothing to hide. She deleted Daniel's contact in front of me, blocked him on every platform, and even handed me her passwords without hesitation. But none of it felt satisfying. The damage was done, and trust couldn't be rebuilt with gestures alone. One night, as we sat silently at the dinner table, she finally spoke. "Max, do you think we'll ever get past this?" I set my fork down and looked at her. "I don't know," I said honestly. "I want to believe we can, but it's going to take time." Her eyes filled with tears, but she nodded. "I'll wait as long as it takes." I didn't respond. Instead, I stood and cleared my plate, the silence between us heavier than ever. Weeks turned into a month, and while the tension in the house eased slightly, the wound was far from healed. Camila kept her word. No suspicious behavior, no contact with Daniel. She attended counseling religiously, even on her own, and continued to ask for my forgiveness. But every time I looked at her, I saw them. Her lies, the betrayal. It played in my mind like a broken record, impossible to shut off. One evening, after our latest counseling session, I knew I had to make a decision. Sitting across from her in the living room, I finally spoke. "Camila, I've been thinking a lot about us," I said. She sat up, her hands clasped tightly. "And I don't think I can do this anymore," I said, my voice steady. "I've tried. I've given it time. But every time I look at you, all I see is what you did to us." Her face crumpled as tears welled in her eyes. "Max, please. I'll keep trying, whatever it takes. Just don't give up on us." I shook my head. "It's not about you trying, Camila. It's about me. I can't live like this, constantly doubting, constantly wondering if I'll ever feel whole again. I need to let go, to move on." She broke down, sobbing into her hands. "I love you, Max. I love you so much." I stood, my heart heavy but resolute. "Maybe you do. But love isn't enough, not after everything that's happened." The next day, I packed my bags and left. The weight on my chest lifted as I closed the door behind me, but the pain lingered. Healing would take time, but I knew I'd made the right choice. Some betrayals leave scars too deep to heal, and sometimes, the only way forward is to walk away. The end.